of relatively fresh. I just want to get all of your takes on it. Captain, we'll start with you and work down, but what do you make of it?
Well, first of all, it came out a little sooner than we all expected, which is actually great. What you're seeing is politics being politics. People are, some people are on the side of like, let's get stablecoin out, focus on that, and then we'll move to market structure. You've seen probably in the headlines and in the dialogue in DC that others are of the opinion that let's put them all together at the same time so we don't lose the momentum. In my conversations with folks in DC, there are people equally on both sides, and all the horses, it's like that little carnival game with the red horse and the blue horse, and they're spraying the water behind them. So everybody's trying to move these forward. So that's all positive. And I'm hearing that there's a hope that, at least with Stable, that will come out before Memorial Day. There was a little bit of last-minute negotiations and language adds that led to the last vote kind of getting jammed up in the works, so a little more time was needed. And that is what is happening now. That time that's needed is occurring. So hopefully we'll get that over the hump and get some stablecoin legislation sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so it sounds like the House Financial Services Committee and House Ag Committee are going to move pretty quickly on the market structure draft. Edits were due on Monday from industry to weigh in with potential ideas. And then we could have a markup at the committee level later this month or possibly the next month. But I really think the big thing is the Senate right now. Obviously, everything that happened with stable coins, right, that's kind of on hold at the moment. We're still very optimistic. But we got to see how that plays out. I think that's the thing that needs to move first, and that'll inform what can happen with market structure. Stable coins, in theory, is an easier lift. So we got to get that back on moving forward, I guess, in the Senate again. It'll be interesting to see where Republicans and Democrats come together on things like financial stability and national security.
So I would say that we have a very narrow window to get legislation through as an industry. I think when we get to the midterms, or even a little before the midterms, our window has closed. And so I think we have a very, very narrow window to get legislation through that I think is going to be pretty existential, because I think there's very likely to be quite a big backlash against crypto in the next administration. And I think it's without having clarifications in the form of a market structure bill and legislation, I think we end up exactly where we were for the last 4 years in the previous administration, where that ambiguity is used by future regulatory agencies to attack the industry. So I think it's absolutely existential that we as an industry can sort of come together and compromise, because I think it's very, very important to note that legislation is never perfect. The legislation is, we need to get something through that is good enough. There's a lot that happens on the back end after legislation is passed in terms of interpretation. So a lot of things can be fixed later. And so I think as an industry, we need to be very willing to compromise, and we need to be laser focused on getting legislation through in the next year.
What does that look like right now? What is the industry able to do to encourage this legislation to advance? And not to get into the politics first thing in the morning, but it seems that President Trump's own foray into crypto is one of the blockers to last week's vote. That's still, I think, an ongoing point of contention. Yeah. So what can the industry do to encourage this?
I would say that is noise, that is stirring the pot, for sure. And that's actually what Senator Warren is using to rally her troops, get them back together to push back against this legislation, which is unfortunate. I think we can clear that noise with some of the dialogue that's happening now about adding language to the bills, and that's the politics you're seeing right now going on behind the scenes. How do we make sure that politicians don't profit necessarily from the activity that's being moved forward? So that is very important, and that's the dialogue that's going on. And I think that is a key component of what's stalled it out a little bit. But I do look at that as background noise right now, and I do think that there's such bipartisan support to get get bills moving that I think we can get over that hump. But that's the politics behind what's been happening. The promise is that this gets done on or before August. So I think we'll be in really good shape. I'm not ready to move to the next administration yet. I feel like, at least from a crypto standpoint, I think we've got some time. But you're right, the executive order can only get you so far. We've got to get the legislation. We need the taxonomy for classifying what these assets are, where they fall, which really determines which of the regulators are going to be the key regulator for these different assets. And I think that is very key. So to your question of what we're all doing is, all of us are talking, all of us are putting pressure on. We're either working with the Digital Chamber on our own, with Blockchain Association. You see that the SEC is having open and honest dialogues with the industry, which is super helpful. So you've got the SEC moving things forward, you've got the executive branch moving things forward, and then we're seeing the pot stir of legislation happening. So all positive forward momentum, and I think what we're all doing is just trying to keep those fires stoked so that we get legislation at the end of this, and to not let perfect be the enemy of the good, which is a very good point.
I think we need to talk to the most relevant players in DC, right? So there are about 5 core Democratic senators right now that hold a lot of the cards, and a few Republicans. So you're looking at Schumer, you're looking at Gallego, you're looking at also Brooks, you're looking at Hawley right now on the Republican side. He voted no on the cloture vote last week, right? Some of the issues that are coming up, for example, with Hawley and some of the Democrats are, should commercial entities be able to issue stable coins, right? We're talking about X, we're talking about Facebook, all these different entities, right? So I think we need to get into these offices and talk to the staff, talk to the members, encourage them that there's so much potential with stable coins here, right? As payments, it's good for the United States. There are so many benefits to that, and we need to encourage them to keep moving forward. Right now, it's honestly at a bit of a standstill. We can break free from that, but we need to keep pushing. We need to keep pushing because at this particular moment, I think it's going to the top. I think the members themselves are going to have to push to re-engage. Right now, I think staff is working hard on it, but they weren't doing as much as they were maybe 2 weeks ago on the bill. Right? Things are slowed down a little bit, so we need to pick that back up.
I'm not getting a sense that things are slowing down from our dialogues, and we have to make sure with the cloture vote that we don't mistake that as a no on the bill. That's a process intermediary step, and that we can't kind of look at that to say where things are going to ultimately land, because that's about that's the politics of it, right? That's not a final vote. That's kind of an intermediary step. So just be careful not to mistake that as where people ultimately stand on wanting this to happen.
They do want it, but there's obviously specifics that really matter, like the issue that you brought up with policymakers, right? Their involvement in crypto themselves, right? This is kind of an ongoing, broader discussion, related to whether or not policymakers should be able to hold individual stocks. These are big questions that Congress has been wrestling with for a while, and they have important national implications. Whether it's more buyers of U.S. Treasuries, right? Whether it's international payments. Whether it's national security, right? Getting that aspect of it right. That's a huge thing that's a concern with a number of members of Congress in terms of BSA. How are we doing KYC? All these things are critical, and these are some of the elements that need to be ironed out in the bill between the Republicans and Democrats, and I agree, everyone wants to get there, but I would say in this particular moment, in my most recent meetings, at the staff level, things aren't as moving like they were just 2 weeks ago, but we can get that going in the right direction soon.
Yeah.
I would add that with the last version of the market structure bill, what we heard in the industry was a lot of, well, we as a company don't really like this section of the bill, or we don't think this is excellent, and so we're not going to support it. Which I think was a huge mistake and would be a huge mistake to do now. I think the idea that the legislation is going to be, needs to be perfect or needs to be even very, very, very good is the thing that leads to a lot of sort of industry infighting. And I think that it's critical that we get something through. We have to have clarity in general about, some structure through which cryptocurrencies can be not a security. It's critical, and it's not going to be perfect. And so my message is that we cannot afford industry infighting, we have to get the legislation through very, very quickly, and I think it's existential.
So, I just maybe quickly, not a detour, but to your point of what is gonna good in the bill. Are there any things right now? While it's just us talking here. Anything in the current market structure bill or even the stablecoin bill that, from like an industry perspective, needs work? If you could write the draft yourself.
What was that last part? Needs what?
If
Sorry.
you could write the draft yourself, what would be included in the market structure bill that is not there now, or what would you change?
Yeah, so I'm all about bipartisanship, right? I know that you need Democrats and Republicans to come together to pass anything in DC. Right now, I'm not sure how many votes the new market structure bill would get in the House Financial Services Committee based on everything that's happened recently. I would hope it would be pretty formidable, but that's not certain. I think you should actually take elements from traditional finance and put them into the market structure bill. For example, segregation of custody and exchange functions that we see I think would go a long ways in terms of making the bill more easily passable. I think that's something that folks have been contemplating, but there hasn't been a real push. But I think because of the recent standstill between the Democrats and Republicans, that might be something that gets reinserted into the debate in the near future.
I think one of the areas that we've seen cause a jam up in other areas is putting some constraints in terms of timing around how long different regulators will have to sit on things. We've seen in certain scenarios, if the SEC is involved, they have to be in many areas. They should be. That's important. But putting some time constraints around decision making so that it's not, okay, you can sit on this and look at what classification this would be ad infinitum. So I think, I know some of us in the industry, we are looking at, okay, which areas would we have both CFTC and SEC looking at, and how you're kind of tossing the ball back and forth, but making sure there's clear lines of how long each can hold the ball, because that's going to jam up the works. And I think that's one of the areas where I know we've been looking at the bill to try to make sure, again, not to make it so that holds everything up, but I think we've seen a couple scenarios where with rulemaking and with other cases where if the SEC has too long to consider, everybody's waiting, and then nature abhors a vacuum, right? So I think that's an area where a little more discipline could be injected into the market structure bill just to make sure that things do move quickly. And I think that's very much in keeping with the new message we're getting from Atkins SEC of, okay, let's move stuff forward, let's not sit on items. So I think they go hand in hand, but that's an area that I would like to see maybe just buttoned up a little bit.
Yeah, and I would say I do think that now is the time for us to be making having this input and having this dialogue with the committee, and it's definitely the right moment for us to be in dialogue with the staff and try to get the bill as right as we possibly can get it. And then at some point there will come a time where we will have to say, okay, this is good enough. Understanding that a lot of the substance is going to come later with the interpretation.
And Nick, just really quickly with stablecoins, maybe there are like roughly three things that I think they're going to have to focus on to get everyone back together on this. So first, like guardrails around commercial entities issuing stablecoins. Second, BSA, like bank-like standards on any issuer of stablecoins. And then last but not least, but the foreign issuer piece, right? What does that look like? I think those are the three critical areas right now on the stablecoin debate.
So on the stablecoin front, and this is going to be a hard segue, one of the main concerns or main debates I've heard is kind of the role of federal regulators versus state regulators. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on how that divide should maybe be handled in the bill that the Senate may vote on again as soon as this week, or maybe not. We'll see.
The Fed versus state has been the huge debate from day one with stablecoin, but I like where it currently sits, and it's not dissimilar. You're saying take aspects from TradFi. It's not dissimilar to how we look at where SEC has federal regulation versus entities that could go with states, and then they get to a certain point and they can move over. There's a selection process within the bill, so I personally like how that's currently set out. And I think it meets both sides where they are. What we don't want is having issuers have to deal with a complete patchwork. We want to achieve some efficiency there. And I think it does a nice job of balancing both, and that was work over the past several years that McHenry kind of was ironing out a lot.
Right.
He spent a lot of time working on that aspect specifically.
I think it's really clear, honestly, there's going to be a huge federalization of stablecoin issuers. I don't think they're going to go to the state route under these bills. I think there's a number of benefits to going the national pathway. And I think that's actually some of the frustration you would see within, I think, the Democratic Party right now, that maybe some of the state jurisdictions are going to potentially have less of a role to play in the stablecoin issuance field, which is maybe not the direction that everyone originally intended, but that's the way that the bill seems to be going.
Yeah, and I would add this is an issue with the market structure bill as well, which is that what we currently have is the SEC settling and resolving cases, and then meanwhile the state DOJs and state attorneys general are literally copying and pasting from these complaints that the SEC has dropped and filing state lawsuits with copy-pasted complaints. Like, that is not sustainable, and so having federal preemption is absolutely critical.
So we could probably talk